President Donald Trump put a wall of tariffs around the US vehicle sector. He said 25% tariffs on imported cars and light trucks would begin on April the 3rd.
This wasn't a slow burn, it was a headline grabber. Now, Toyota, GM, and Ford are scrambling as supply chain pressure makes this more than a financial headline. It's an industry-wide crisis. The auto industry just suffered its single biggest financial blow in over a decade, and it happened in less than 48 hours. Toyota, GM, Ford, and a half dozen other giants have collectively lost $12 billion in market value, and the shockwaves are still spreading. The trigger? A sudden escalation in the trade war that blindsided both Wall Street and the car-buying public. Late Tuesday night, the U.S. administration announced massive new tariffs on imported auto parts and vehicles, hitting not just China, but also Japan, South Korea, and the European Union. These tariffs, up to 50% on certain critical components, took effect instantly. For Toyota, that means billions in extra costs as parts flowing in from Japan now face a financial chokehold. GM, which relies heavily on Chinese manufacturing for electronics and battery modules, suddenly finds itself staring at a production bottleneck it can't solve overnight. The shock was so severe that within hours, Toyota's stock in Tokyo plunged nearly 7%, wiping out months of gains. GM's market cap tumbled by $4 billion before midday trading even closed. But here's the part that's making industry insiders panic. This isn't just about higher prices. The supply chain for modern cars is so globally interlinked that one missing part can halt production entirely. And these tariffs target exactly those pressure points. Semiconductors, lithium battery cells, high-strength steel, all are now dramatically more expensive or stuck in customs gridlock. Ford has already issued a warning. If part shortages persist for more than 3 weeks, it will have to idle multiple plants. That would mean thousands of workers temporarily laid off, billions in lost revenue, and even longer wait times for customers. Meanwhile, European automakers like BMW and Mercedes are quietly lobbying Washington to carve out exemptions before they get caught in the same trap. The reaction in global markets was instant and brutal. The Nikkei in Japan dropped over 600 points. South Korea's Kospi saw its worst day in months. Even the Dow Jones felt the sting, slipping 400 points as investors scrambled to reprice auto stocks. Analysts are now openly comparing this to the early days of the 2018 to 2019 US-China trade war, when sudden tariffs knocked entire industries into chaos. But this time, the stakes are even higher, because EVs, already dependent on fragile supply chains, are directly in the crosshairs. And there's one more thing you need to know. These tariffs aren't just a punishment. They're a warning. And that warning could mean an even more devastating round of economic retaliation, one that might drag in an entirely different sector nobody's talking about yet. Within hours of the US announcement, the first signs of retaliation began to surface, and they weren't subtle. Beijing wasted no time, hinting at counter-tariffs targeting American-made cars and agricultural exports, a move that would slam GM, Ford, and Tesla right where they're most vulnerable, China's massive consumer market. This is critical because for companies like GM, China isn't just a side business, it's their single largest market, accounting for more than 40% of total sales. If that door slams shut, they don't just lose revenue, they lose global relevance. Meanwhile, Japan, usually cautious in trade disputes, is said to be preparing a diplomatic counterstrike, with Tokyo insiders leaking plans for a joint Asian-European coalition to challenge the US tariffs through the WTO. And in Brussels, EU trade officials have reportedly drafted a list of American exports, from tech components to luxury goods, that could be hit with up to 60% tariffs if negotiations fail. But here's the twist nobody expected. It's not just governments lining up to hit back. Corporate retaliation is quietly taking shape. Multiple parts suppliers in South Korea and Germany have already told automakers they will halt shipments to US factories until new pricing agreements are reached. That means even cars manufactured entirely in America could stall on production lines because a $30 foreign sensor suddenly costs $120, or worse, is unavailable at any price. And when one automaker grinds to a halt, the domino effect can cripple the entire industry, from steel mills to trucking companies to dealerships. Wall Street knows this, which is why investors aren't waiting for the dust to settle. They're already pulling billions out of auto stocks and rotating into safe havens like gold and treasury bonds. The tension now is almost surgical. Every move by one side triggers an immediate counter from the other, and neither appears ready to blink. What makes this especially dangerous is the timing. The global auto sector was already under pressure from slowing EV demand, rising interest rates, and record-high raw material costs. This trade war isn't hitting a healthy industry. It's striking an industry already limping. And if the retaliation ramps up as expected, the next wave of tariffs could spill far beyond cars and parts. Because insiders say the next target on the list isn't automotive at all. It's something even more essential to the US economy. If sources close to the negotiations are right, the next battlefield won't be cars. It'll be energy. Specifically, US exports of liquefied natural gas, LNG, and crude oil, two of the few sectors where America holds a dominant advantage. For years, Washington has leaned on LNG exports as both an economic weapon and a diplomatic bargaining chip, especially in Europe, where countries rushed to replace Russian gas after the Ukraine invasion. But now, Beijing and Brussels are reportedly drafting a coordinated tariff package that would slap double-digit duties on American energy shipments. That's not just a dent in profits. That's billions in lost contracts, billions in stranded shipments, and potentially surging fuel prices back home as domestic supply piles up. And remember, higher energy costs ripple through every single industry, from manufacturing to food production to shipping. The danger here is that energy tariffs wouldn't just hurt oil giants like ExxonMobil or Chevron, they'd hit every consumer in the US directly. Higher production costs mean higher prices for goods, higher heating bills, higher transport fees. And if you think the average American voter will sit quietly while gas jumps back to $6 a gallon in an election year, think again. That's exactly why political strategists on both sides are panicking behind closed doors, because energy tariffs turn a trade war into a domestic political crisis almost overnight. But there's another layer to this: the strategic chokehold. If foreign buyers start locking in long-term deals with competitors like Qatar, Australia, or even Russia, the US could lose market share. It might never win back. Energy contracts often last 10, 15, even 20 years. Miss out now, and those pipelines and shipping lanes will be filled for decades. That's why industry lobbyists are flooding Washington with urgent warnings, pushing for emergency talks before these plans become official. The problem? Every back-channel conversation so far has ended in the same stalemate. No one's willing to make the first concession, which means the window to stop this from escalating is closing fast. And if it closes completely, the next phase won't just be about trade. It could trigger something far more dangerous on the geopolitical stage. If energy tariffs go live, the trade war instantly transforms into a global power struggle because tariffs rarely travel alone. Sanctions, export bans, and even retaliatory asset freezes almost always follow. And the first casualties won't be factories or corporations, it'll be entire alliances. Washington's European partners, already split over defense spending and climate policy, could fracture completely under the pressure. Countries dependent on cheap US gas might side with America, while others desperate for stable trade with China could quietly break ranks. This isn't just about trade routes anymore, it's about choosing sides in a new Cold War. The US knows this, which is why some insiders claim the administration is already drafting secondary sanctions aimed at any country that enforces the new tariffs. That's a direct threat to Europe, to Asia, and even to allies in the Middle East. The message would be simple: If you trade under these tariffs, you trade without us. But here's the catch. That kind of economic brinkmanship has backfired before. In the 1982nd, a similar sanctions push ended up isolating the US from several key partners for years, forcing a humiliating reversal. China, meanwhile, is playing the long game. It's been quietly ramping up deals with resource-rich nations across Africa and South America, securing energy pipelines and rare earth supply chains that bypass Western choke points entirely. If tariffs push Beijing to accelerate those projects, the US could find itself locked out of markets it once dominated. That's why analysts warn that this isn't just a tariff fight, it's a blueprint for a permanent economic realignment. And once that realignment happens, there's no back to normal. Trade maps get redrawn. Old alliances dissolve, new blocks rise. The dollar's dominance starts to wobble. And if the dollar's dominance cracks, that's when this stops being a trade story and starts being a financial survival story for the United States itself. If the dollar loses its iron grip on global trade, every American will feel it instantly, not in some abstract economic chart, but in the price of their next grocery run, their mortgage payment, even the cost of filling up their tank. Because the day the world stops treating the dollar as the ultimate safe haven currency is the day the US can no longer borrow cheaply to fund its government, its military, or its lifestyle. That's when interest rates skyrocket. That's when inflation turns from a political headache into a national emergency. And here's the unnerving part. Major economies have been testing alternatives for years. China's digital yuan, the euro's payment systems, even a BRICS-backed commodity currency, all have been quietly building the infrastructure to operate outside the US dollar system. Tariffs this aggressive could be the very spark they've been waiting for to make the switch. If that happens, the US might wake up one morning to find its greatest weapon, the dollar, no longer feared, no longer desired, and no longer dominant. When that shift comes, it won't just be an economic downturn. It will be a full-scale reordering of power. US influence, built over decades of dollar supremacy, could collapse in months. The Pentagon's reach could shrink, trade leverage could vanish, and for the first time in modern history, Washington would have to negotiate from a position of weakness, not strength. This is why energy tariffs, on the surface just another political maneuver, could actually be the first domino in a chain reaction that topples the very foundation of American power. And once the first domino falls, there's no stopping the collapse, because the rest of the world won't be waiting to see if America gets back up. The question isn't whether the dollar will face its reckoning. The question is whether these tariffs just moved that day a whole lot closer.